I want to start the show this evening with a little bit of history. And I want you to stick with me right to the end because it'll become clear why I'm doing this. Plus, I think it's very compelling. Let's start with the Declaration of Independence, even though our history doesn't actually start there. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were Christians, every one of them. They were Congregationalists, Presbyterian, Anglican, Unitarian, Roman Catholic. Two were deists, but they did believe in God. They were men of varying denominations, but united and emphatic in the belief that the Creator was the origin of their existence and the source of their reason. They were men who believed deeply in Judeo-Christian values and beliefs. And the Declaration itself, well, it makes that clear with its several references to God and His sovereignty, natural law, natural rights, and what are eternal truths. The unity of Judeo-Christian beliefs was expressed in multiple ways by the greatest of our founders. In his 1790 letter to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, Washington, which he visited in August of that year, George Washington stated, "The American government, quote, gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance," unquote, affirming religious freedom and promising safety for Jews and all faiths, using the biblical image of sitting under his own vine and fig tree, quote unquote, to promise liberty of conscience for all citizens. Washington declared that the new nation's government would not support intolerance or oppression. He emphasized that liberty of conscience for Jews and other religious groups was a natural right, not a mere tolerance granted by the majority. He quoted from the book of Micah, promising that, quote, "the children of the stock of Abraham shall sit in safety under their own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid." This was an important example of the respect Christians and Jews had for each other. In Virginia, Thomas Jefferson, he repealed the so-called law of disabilities for dissenters and Jews, quote unquote, a carryover from English rule that limited Jews and others on their holding of property or public office. He replaced that law with a new bill, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, the precursor to what would become our Bill of Rights in the First Amendment. He did a whole lot more. To this day, Jefferson is highly regarded in the Jewish community as an early voice for religious liberty, and throughout America, for that matter. There are accounts of mutual respect and cooperation between Christians and Jews, such as in 1789 in Philadelphia, where the rabbi of the Jews, as he was called, marched, quote, locked in the arms of two ministers of the gospel, unquote, in a parade celebrating the Constitution. The Hebrew Bible and ancient Israelite political ideas was very important on the founders' thinking and the formation of the American Republic. And it was a Jewish man who came to the United States from Poland and joined the American Revolution in 1775. His name was Chaim Solomon, who was the main financier of the Revolutionary War and of the Battle of Yorktown. George Washington specifically said to James Madison, "We have 3 weeks to fight in Yorktown. The French are here to help us, but they're going to leave. We're out of money. I have a potential mutiny. I have to pay my soldiers. Contact Chaim Solomon." And Chaim Solomon raised $20,000 of his own fund, an enormous amount of money at that point, and provided it to our colonists in the end to defeat the British. James Adams, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, all of them knew the Hebrew Bible from beginning to end. They spoke and wrote of the ancient Israelites in glowing terms, and the Jews were deeply grateful and outspoken in their appreciation for the Christians and the principles and values they promoted and enshrined in state constitutions and the nation's constitution, especially the First Amendment. And that is true to this day. I mention this because there are voices today who are spinning lies and libel about our history, about our values, about we as a people trying to divide Christian from Jew and Jew from Christian. And I am here to strongly dispel this. We are American patriots who stand on the shoulders of our founders. We must speak out as they would. We must stand up as they would. We must proudly declare our principles. America is the greatest country ever established because of our founders and its embrace by subsequent generations. We are the most diverse, tolerant, successful, and beneficent society mankind has ever known because of what we believe and how we were founded on our principles. That doesn't mean everyone has to agree with us, has to be Christian or Jewish, of course not. But it does mean that we must enshrine that the eternal truths of which this country and this society were founded and created are never abandoned. Indeed, are always celebrated. But that's not all. Stick with me. Stick with me. Those of us who are Republicans must remember how our party was conceived and established. The Republican Party was a coalition of anti-slavery parties, first contemplated in 1854 and formalized as a party in 1856. In early 1854, the first meeting took place in Ripon, Wisconsin. On July 6, 1854, outside of Jackson, Michigan, upwards of 10,000 people turned out for a mass meeting under the Oaks, quote unquote. Reminds me of the Tea Party. This led to the first organizing convention in Pittsburgh on February 22, 1856. The gavel fell to open the party's first nominating convention, as they write in ushistory.org, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on June 17, 1856, announcing the birth of the Republican Party as a unified political force. Well, what did this party stand for? The Republican Party platform, June 18, 1856, says in pertinent part, resolved that with our Republican fathers, we hold it to be self-evident truth that all men are endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that the primary object and ulterior design of our federal government were to secure these rights to all persons under its exclusive jurisdiction. That, as our Republican fathers, when they had abolished slavery in all our national territory, ordained that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law, it becomes our duty to maintain this provision of the Constitution against all attempts to violate it for the purpose of establishing slavery in territories of the United States by positive legislation prohibiting its existence or extension therein. That we deny the authority of Congress, of a territorial legislation, of any individual or association of individuals to give legal existence to slavery in any territory of the United States, while the present Constitution shall be maintained. The Republican Party was founded for one reason and one reason only: to eliminate slavery. So we've talked a little bit about our early history, Judeo-Christian values and belief system, joining together our Declaration, our Constitution, what the great men, early men, great founders of this country believed of that link between Jews and Christians in our history. And now we talk about the Republican Party that was founded to oppose the Democrat Party and slavery. 4 years later, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the first Republican president. It triggered the secession of southern states, which in turn, as you know, led to the most deadly war in American history, the Civil War, with over 700,000. As late as August 1864, Lincoln believed he might lose this re-election. He had certain battle defeats, and the people were getting tired of the war. People didn't want to be drafted anymore. When would this be over? Almost every family in the country, union and non-union, were affected by this war. But his generals, Grant, Sherman, secured several major battlefield victories, turning the election around. So he won. On March 4th, 1865, as Lincoln was sworn in a second time, he gave his inaugural address, which, by the way, turned out to be the second shortest in our history. The first was Washington's inauguration, which he provided in writing during his first election. Here's what he said in its entirety. Fellow countrymen, at the second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at the first. Then a statement, somewhat in detail, of a course to be pursued seemed fitting and proper. Now at the expiration of 4 years, during which public declarations have been constantly called forth on every point and phase of the great contest, which still absorbs the attention and engrosses the energies of the nation, little that is new could be presented. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is as well known to the public as to myself, and it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all, meaning they were about to win the Civil War. With high hope for the future, no prediction in regard to it is ventured. On this occasion, corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it. All sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude of the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of another man's face, but let us judge not that we be judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Quote, "Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be the offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh." If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, by which, having continued to the appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South the terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in living God always ascribe to him. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsmen 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, referring to the Bible, Judaism, Christianity. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall be born the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Mark, where are we going with this? Very, very important. What followed? 13th Amendment to the Constitution, pushed by the Republicans. 1865, abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, pushed by the Republicans. 1868, granted citizenship and due process and equal protection to all. 15th Amendment, passed 1870, prohibited denying the right to vote based on race. In addition to those amendments, before, during, and after, Civil Rights Acts, all pushed by Republicans. Civil Rights Act of 1866 granted citizenship and equal rights to all persons born in the United States. The Enforcement Act of 1871, the Ku Klux Klan Act, to go after the Ku Klux Klan, which the Republican President Ulysses S. Grant did, almost wiped them out. The Democrats then took the House and they cut off funding for Grant, sending the Army to the South to destroy the Klan. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 prohibited discrimination in public accommodations. Civil Rights Act of 1957 under Dwight Eisenhower. First federal civil rights legislation since Reconstruction established the Civil Rights Division within the Department of Justice. Civil Rights Act of 1960, again, Ike. strengthen voting rights enforcement. Civil Rights Act of 1964, proposed by Lyndon Johnson. Without the overwhelming support of the Republicans, it never would have happened. Voting Rights Act of 1965, the same thing. I chose to discuss some of our history, albeit truncated, because it is important to remember who we are. It is important to remember why we are a great people and how we established a great country and society. It is important to remember our shared values, beliefs, and principles, the struggles and battles we have fought as a people that I barely touched on, but essential to our nature and our being as a people. I say this because today we face a choice. We face a reckoning. There are people, groups, parties, ideologies that seek to destroy our country, our society, to destroy us as a people. They insist our history is evil. They rewrite our history. They condemn our forefathers, the institutions they established, and our founding documents. They seek to destroy the bond between Christians and Jews and other people of goodwill, regardless of backgrounds and belief. They seek to destroy our culture, our unity, our commitment, one to the other. I speak of the Marxist Islamists, but I also speak of what I call the neo-fascists. Together, they are spreading poison throughout our politics, our public discourse, and our institutions. They seek to devour them and eradicate them. They seek to import and spread alien ideologies, cultures, and customs through the body politic, and they reject assimilation and Americanism. The Democrat Party has been largely consumed by this Marxist Islamist ideology, which it has metastasized. It is a Democrat Party that has returned to its old ways, only this time it has replaced one minority group with another. But it remains hostile to the American founding and Americanism. It is turned on Jews and Christians, and it embraces radical agendas incompatible with our founding. But I spoke of the Republican Party earlier and why it was established. It has always been the party of civil liberties and civil rights, despite what has been written about it by so-called historians. And today, it is the only party that remains that supports the Judeo-Christian principles that undergird our country, that celebrates the founders and the founding. It is the one party of the two parties that does. But there is a cancer within the Republican Party, or at least circling around it, and it threatens to devour the Republican Party as well. And I am calling on constitutional conservatives, MAGA, Republican leaders, to speak out more, to forcefully stand up and be counted. For we cannot allow this cancer to become malignant, in which case no major party will be left to prevent this malignancy. Now, there are more of us confronting it today than there were several months ago when I felt like I was alone and it was very lonely. But we're coming together, but not enough of us. We must all remember that we, you and me, Mr. and Mrs. America, we are the civil libertarians. We are the American patriots. We are the people of goodwill and faith. And we must remember what we have inherited over the last 250 years. We must take the lead. We must be a massive force, a force against anti-Semitism, a force against Christian bashing, a force against racism and bigotry, against Marxism, Islamism, and neo-fascism. We must remember who we are. We must join together. And for those so-called leaders who are silent, or worse, who are coddling this ideology, we must reject them and remove them and place them with real leaders.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.